What's going on, everyone? My name's Eric, and today on the channel I have the pleasure of showing you all an amp that I wanted to try out for such a long time. And finally, I have it here right in front of me, as you can all see. This is the Krankenstein. This is the revision 1, and it should be no surprise to anyone who is a regular viewer of the channel of why I am so excited to actually try this amp out, because obviously it is the Dimebag Darrell's signature crank amp that he designed with crank amps for his short tenure with the brand. And yeah, this is an amp that I've wanted to try for a long time, and just crank amps in general. They were really not around when I was really getting into guitar. The only amps that I really saw was like the small 20 watt, like Rev Juniors and stuff like that. But of course, I wanted to try the big boys, and those really weren't in the city that I grew up in. And even on the used market, they just kind of never really showed up. So I have this here courtesy of my good friend Ryan Day, who owns this amp, and he said I can hang out with it for a little bit and borrow it, and that's what I've done. And really gotten to know this amp and just see what it is all about. And yeah, I'm stoked, and I'm really looking forward to making this whole video for you all. And given this is a signature gear, I know a lot of people are just gonna think that, oh, it's a one-trick pony, it can only sound like one thing, or this is only gonna sound like Dimebag. And well, guess what? You're wrong, because there's so many albums that have been recorded with this amp, and there's so many other producers and guitar players who love this amp, and they don't sound like Dimebag. And yeah, let's hear this amp not sounding like Dimebag in a full mix. Just heard, that was the Krankenstein in a full demo mix that was recorded using my LSL baritone guitar, 27.5-inch scale. I went straight into my Seymour Duncan 805 overdrive pedal just to boost the front end a little bit more. Then went into the Krankenstein with the settings that you are seeing on screen. It then went out of the Krankenstein into my 2 Notes audio captor, which then had a IR capture of my Krankenstein cab that was using the Eminence Legends and the Eminence Texas Heat. Now let's learn a little bit more about the Krankenstein and some of the revisions that came after the Krankenstein amp. So as I said earlier, the Krankenstein amp is the Dimebag Darrell signature amp when he joined forces with Krank in and around 2004, from what I recall. Krank amps were officially born in 1996, but they didn't really get rolling until around 2003 when they actually came into the public eye with the actual Revolution model. Dimebag would then use the Krank Rev Series amp for the latter half of his time with Damageplan. While he was using the Rev Series amp, he was actually developing an amp known as the Krankenstein, which we are obviously talking about today. And the Krankenstein essentially takes from where the Rev left off and then took it to a whole new level, if you will. And as far as I know, I'm pretty sure Dime was not able to actually use the Krankenstein for obvious reasons with his untimely passing, but the amp did come out as more or less a tribute and a signature model to honor Dime's legacy, as he did create it, and obviously Krank wanted to bring that out into production. And it wasn't long after that where the Krankenstein Plus came out, and that amp has a couple bells and whistles that are changed from the original Krankenstein, namely the output tubes and the overall output wattage. So the main Krankenstein that we're demoing today, that is 100 watts, has 4 6L6s and has 4 12AX7 preamp tubes, and it has 2 independent channels. And then the Krankenstein Plus was then changed to introduce 6550 power tubes. I believe it was either 4 or 5 12AX7 tubes, for potentially additional gain or maybe some additional tube-driven features on the amp, as well as the total output volume on the amp was increased to 120 watts. And that is one amp that I would also love to try because, again, it's another signature Dimebag product, and, I would just love to try it because, if it was designed with Dimebag in mind, or it was designed with where the actual Dimebag design amp kind of left off. I do remember when Krank amps really took the metal storm by scene, and it really seemed like a lot of the up-and-coming bands and even a lot of those legacy bands were really playing Krank amps, and it really seemed like that was the new sound. You know, it wasn't a 5150, and it wasn't a rectifier, for example, or wasn't a Marshall. This was like the new amp that everyone was playing, and it seemed like a lot of people were really liking it. And for myself as a young guitar player getting into music, reading all the different Guitar World magazines and seeing the full-page print ads for Krank amps and seeing a lot of these iconic and influential players, you know, playing Krank amps, and I was like, well, of course, I want to actually play these amps one day. And like, not to mention, like, their amps actually made it into Metalocalypse, and that was like the amp of choice. And I'm pretty sure they actually made it into a Guitar Hero as well, which is, again, another cool thing, a game I played when I was younger and a show that I watched when I was younger as well. So of course, there's a little bit of product placement there, and of course, I want to play the amps that I see in these different forms of media that I am consuming and of the bands that I am listening to. Because if this brand is making its rounds in this kind of way, then of course I want to represent it, especially if it is a wicked product as well. So now at this point in the video, let's hear how the amp reacts just with a guitar tuned to standard E outside of the context of a mix, and I'm just going to show you what all the tone controls do and just how they sound and how they react with each other. let's hear a couple different guitars, a couple different tunings with a couple different cabs all through the Krank Krankenstein. So now at the end of the day, what do I think about the Krankenstein? I'm going to be very unbiased as I can. And to be totally honest, I'm very blown away about this amp. And I will say, like, when I first plugged it in, like, I think I had a little bit of user error because I did not like the sound of it at all. I actually plugged it into my captor, and if you have a 2-notes captor, you would know that there's a couple different sections where you can change the IR to either guitar, bass, or you can just turn it off and use a third-party IR on your computer. I had it on the guitar section, and I tried to throw another IR with it, and yeah, I was, pretty less than impressed with the sound of it, and it was kind of like, putting on a couple pairs of wet socks. It was not fun. Then going back a couple days later, and after a little bit of user error, and using some actual good IRs, and then using it through some real cabinets, like, I'm so blown away. This thing is insane. Like, it's a very dynamic amp. It sounds very different when you plug in either different guitars, different cabinets, obviously, as it should when you're plugging in different cabinets. Honestly, like, the note definition and the clarity when you really dial it in, especially as I played with the 8-string in the last clip there, I was blown away, like how that low F was really resonating and just how clear it sounded. It really sounded like that bell-like clarity, and I could not believe it. It was just very aggressive. I really like that scoopy, like, kind of mid-range sound that it has, but it's not like gonna get lost in the mix. I really found the sweep function to be very interesting. It's not as like, turn it up, scoop all the mids, turn it down, scoop all the mids. It's not really like that. It's kind of like you're fine-tuning that mid-range response and how the mid-ranges kind of respond to your playing and the different guitar and the pickups and everything. Like, it's really cool and it's really functional. And something that I do want to say about all the different tone controls on the amp is that I believe they are concentric, or they're kind of like a Mesa Boogie where they're all like affecting each other when you actually adjust them. So this is, even though I like kind of set the amp flat and all the tone controls at noon, and it sounded pretty good like that, the tone controls, they do affect each other a little bit, kind of like, as I said, like a Mesa. So if you haven't played a Mesa, like, they do take a little bit of time to get dialed in, and same with this Krank, like, it took a little bit of time to get dialed in. I then was able to download like a PDF of the manual and use some of like the actual like user suggested settings and the Dime suggested settings from the Rev and from the actual like Krankenstein, and that was a really great starting point. So if you do get this amp, like, go through the manual and just like actually use like those user suggested settings just to kind of get you started. There's a ton of gain and there's a ton of low end, so like I did have to really like turn the low end down just so it wasn't getting super woofy in the context of a mix, but you kind of have to do that with any sort of amp and guitar as it is. And you know, just to briefly like touch base on the clean channel, like it's a clean channel, it's clean, it sounds fine, like you throw some effects on it and it sounds good. Like, you know, we're not really here to talk about the clean channel. Like the distortion side is what we're here to talk about. And again, just to write home, like it's a wicked amp. Sure, I maybe wish it had MIDI if I was going to use this live today, like with a, you know, a multi-effects unit and do a bunch of channel switching and things like that. But honestly, just for like the purpose of this demo and like how I would use it like in a studio context of like dialing in a really good sound and then just recording with it or even just jamming with it, like it sounds wicked as it is. And again, like I just don't want people thinking like this is a one-trick pony. Like this thing sounds awesome, and even plugging in different guitars, different scale lengths, different pickups, different woods, playing different styles of metal on it, like it just sounds really good, and that note definition and the clarity is really there, which was very, very surprising. I was kind of going into this as a very like an empty surface and just like whatever happens, happens with this amp, and let's just see how it plays. And yeah, like it's a sick amp. It sounds awesome through various different cabinets, and even if you know you are going to be using like the Krankenstein cab or like the actual like Eminence Legends that Dimebag would have used, like it sounds awesome as well through that, even if you're not playing Pantera, Damageplan, Dimebag related riffs or anything like that. So take that for what you will. I recommend this amp. I think it's deadly, and I think I heard through the grapevine that Krank might be coming back, so we'll see what happens there. And that's going to do it for today's video on a full walkthrough and demo of the Krank Krankenstein amp. If you like this video and you want to see me do other amplifier demos in the future, let me know in the comments below, and even feel free to drop your suggestions as well, because I do love my tube amps and my amps in general, and I would love to share that with you and at least maybe bring a little bit of that onto the channel as well. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you really like what I do, make sure you consider subscribing. Tons more content like this on the channel, and if you are a returning subscriber, make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that I upload. Thanks for checking this out, and I'll see you next time.